Okay. Awesome. Well, welcome everybody. We can kind of get things rolling. I'm sure this topic is top of mind for everybody. And we were just having a good chat backstage and doing a last minute check to make sure we didn't miss any news in the last 35 seconds, which seems to be the way things are going. But super excited to have everybody here. Thank you for joining. I'll just do some quick intros and kind of tee it up. And then we can get right into the meat of it. If you guys have questions or comments, don't be shy, drop them right in and we will get it going. We want as much of today's session to be oriented toward workshopping real problems and providing as much assistance as we possibly can. But just to get things going by way of introduction, I'm Austin Gardner-Smith. I'm the co-founder and CEO at a company called Drivepoint. We're blessed to have Drew Marconi here is the CEO at Intelligems, and Hayley Rovet, who leads finance and ops and all kinds of amazing things at Love Wellness and is a mutual customer. So we want to make sure that we have all this stuff covered for you and that we get you as much intel as possible. But maybe just quick off with some quick intros. Drew, do you want to just give us the 10-second overview on you, your background in Intelligems, and then we'll do the same and then kind of hand the mic to Hayley.
Yeah, I'm Drew. I'm the CEO, one of the co-founders at Intelligems. We've been around for 5 years. We are a profit growth and price testing platform. So seeing people test a lot of prices right now. My background was consultant at McKinsey turned dynamic pricing expert in rideshare. And then the last 5 years been bringing dynamic pricing principles over to ecom. So I'm calling in from New York.
Awesome. And knows a few things about pricing and testing and all that good stuff. So awesome voice to have here. I introduced myself. My name is Austin. Just so you have 2 seconds on Drivepoint, we do financial forecasting and planning, essentially FP&A and analytics and BI, all focused on consumer and retail brands. That's all we work with. And I think about it as sort of A/B testing for the whole business. So being able to run scenarios that go from the price line, all the way down through EBITDA, cash, inventory, really have good, accurate plans and forecasts, and then be able to unlock EBITDA for the business through better decision-making by running those scenarios out and attaching dollar signs to stuff. So awesome customers like Hayley and others, but our goal is to help people find more money just like Drew. So Hayley, you're the star of the show here. It would be great to get sort of like a little bit of an intro from you just on yourself and your background, and then maybe just dive into the sort of the story of Love Wellness so we know, have some grounding in what's going on with you guys, and I'll interview you a little bit along the way as we go here.
Great. So I'm Hayley. Right now I'm CFO at Love Wellness. My background is really deep in CPG and early stage and high growth scale up CPG. So prior to Love Wellness, I was in the pet space for a long while, but really focused on consumable products. And most recently moved over to Love Wellness about a year ago now, in the women's health space, which is, really booming these days, which is nice. A little bit about Love Wellness. It was founded in 2016 by Lode Bosworth. It really came from a point of personal frustration with the options out there for women's health that she was experiencing in her life, which drove her to really create some amazing products for women. It was the first company of its kind, and really paved the way for a number of others that have followed in the years to come. And at this point, we have distribution quite broadly. So in retail, we're at Target, Ulta, Walmart. We have some new launches coming soon as well. We also sell through our own D2C website as well as on Amazon.
Awesome. And what's sort of like the big or broad strokes of where you guys are at from a company? What's the main goals? Are you guys trying to scale in national distribution? Is it full omni-channel? Is it get to the next stage of growth? Like what's sort of the next big rock for you guys as a company?
We're really in continued scale mode. We have been increasing points of distribution rapidly. This year, we had a very large push to increase our retail points of distribution, really trying to meet the customer wherever they are. And that's been shifting over the last 5-6 years. Through COVID, there was a big online push. And recently we're seeing that consumers are going back to store, and we just want to be available where they want to discover us and purchase us in their day-to-day.
Awesome. And then maybe just so everyone has kind of the context too, how are you guys? I know you guys have some outside investment, like talk a little bit about the capital structure of the business and sort of where you guys are, what a home run looks like for you guys in terms of either an exit or run it forever or anything else like that.
Yeah, well, We do have an outside partner, Encore Consumer Capital. They're based out of San Francisco, and I actually have a decent history working alongside them at a couple of their holdings. And I think they're wonderful partners in the sense that they're looking for us to grow the best, most sustainable business we possibly can. And I think that generally tracking towards that more so than a specific outcome often leads to the best success you can possibly find. So we're often talking about just how can we build up, scale up, and increase value in general for everyone, and better meet the consumer and address consumers' issues as much as we can. And if we focus on that, that's really the road to success.
Awesome. All right, so let's turn to sort of the topic at hand here. Obviously, we've had some news at the very beginning of this week, some big news in terms of things changing on the tariff front. Hayley, just talk to us from the Love Wellness lens of sort of one, how much impact it's had, how you guys have thought about it, and then how you think about responding, and then maybe we can open it up and sort of see okay, where are people at? How did this week's news change people's perception? Drew, what are you seeing with the customer base? I can talk about what we're seeing, all that kind of good stuff.
Yeah, I think one of the benefits that Love Wellness has had is that since it is a pioneer and it's been around since 2016, the company had already been pressure tested by the first round of tariffs back during the COVID days. And during that time, strategic decisions were made to really bolster our supply chain, ensure that we had secondary sources available, and really try to make sure we have as much flexibility as possible, knowing that this type of disruption can be expected in today's day and age. So yeah. We definitely benefited from the fact that a lot of groundwork was done, and I wasn't even there at the time, so I have to give the credit to the rest of the team. But to really bolster our supply chain, find new partners, find duplicate sources for various items so that we have as much flexibility as possible. So with that groundwork being there, we're very lucky in that we do a lot of our manufacturing right now is in the United States. So the direct impact on us is not what we're seeing with certain companies where they're buying finished goods from China, where they're seeing the full brunt of that tariff. And really having their entire cash flow structure upended. So as a starting point, I want to say it's part luck and part by design. I think a lot of startup and scale ups are really focused on sales, and that is very important. But equally important these days is to make sure you have a very well insulated and strategic supply chain set up for this type of disruption.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
I was gonna say that's super interesting because I know you've seen this sort of growth stage before, and worked in CPG across businesses. When, in your opinion, is kind of the right time to start building that? Because in the early days, it's really hard to focus on anything but sales, right? You kind of have to just keep scaling. But how do you think about making those investments in supply chain? Because I'm sure a lot of people are wrestling with that today. Of okay, now I know that there's some work that I could go and do, and some money that I could deploy to make my supply chain more stable. But how do I know if that's worth it? Am I too early to make those investments? What's your sort of guidelines or rules of thumb? And Drew, I'd love your take on that too.
I would say I've been in companies that are pre-Series A, super early stage, where you're really just trying to prove of concept that there is a market for your product, and just getting it off the ground. You have no scale at that time. You're begging manufacturers to even work with you with the level of volume you can give them. So for sure, in those early days, it's really focused on product market fit and, getting your first supply chain partners on board and really bought into your vision. But honestly, I think earlier than probably most people would think would be when I would start thinking about this. Maybe when you hit around between 5 and 10 million of revenue, you're starting to think, okay, now operations and the back end supply chain really is important, because ultimately it can be a real strategic advantage for you. And it could be make or break for a lot of businesses sooner than later in the world we live in these days. So I wouldn't wait too long on it.
Yeah, it makes total sense. I think having it, to your point of creating a strategic advantage, is really interesting. So there was one thing that you mentioned in sort of our pre-show notes that I wanted to touch on. You talked about sort of having a two-pronged strategy here with tariffs and sort of just supply chain, I think, disruption generally. One around customer pricing and sales, and we can definitely get into that. I think the other one is around the management and the supply chain side. one of the most interesting things on the pricing piece that you mentioned was that you sort of had made this commitment to having no changes in SRPs in 2025. And I think that's super interesting and tactical. And so I wanted you to maybe talk a little bit about that and how you got there and what that means to you. Because I thought that was it was sort of the jujitsu strategic move in some ways of being on the front foot with this stuff. And I thought it was really interesting.
Yeah. In a lot of ways, I was really brought back to early COVID days, March 2020, when this turbulence first started. And I was fortunate at that time to really happen into an opportunistic situation where I was at that time. We had a very strong inventory position when a lot of our competition couldn't keep inventory on shelves. And being able to be that strategic and reliable partner to our retailers and tell them not only do we have product, but we are not jumping up our prices on you was a massive win for us that allowed us to scale rapidly during that time period. So I had that experience to bring into this most recent turbulence that we've encountered, and really wanted to kind of take a page out of that same playbook. And I do have to credit Drivepoint. It helped me evaluate very quickly what our exposure was to tariffs. So just because we manufacture in the United States, we're still indirectly exposed. Our co-manufacturers are sourcing, most of the herbal, mineral, and vitamin ingredients in the world are coming from Asia. So there's definitely raw material exposure.
Yeah.
And we were within one day able to measure our potential exposure on the tariff front. And I always kind of say Drivepoint is where all of our kind of stress and anxiety and craziness can live. We can think about all the ups and downs and the 20 different scenarios in there. And then I can go out to my management team and to our internal team with stability and a plan to really shelter them from that. They don't need to go through all of that. So that's what that really allowed us to do very quickly, which was just incredibly beneficial.
Yeah.
Awesome.
I was talking to someone the other day on your point about how you took advantage of 2020, where they were like, retail shelves are not going to be empty. So this is your chance to get on there, because there are certainly brands that are going to be falling off. So if you are in a position to take advantage of it, go for it. I'm curious. One thing that I always ask is how those pricing decisions gets made, because there is, we work with probably 2,200 different brands and wildly different sizes. There is very little consistency I see in who owns pricing. So you have now your assessment of the impact of tariffs, so you understand your sensitivity. Who do you bring around the table to say, hey, we are going to guarantee these prices won't change? Or if you had to suggest price changes, that's question one. Like, what is that conversation like? What other data points are happening? And then question two, as a omni-channel brand that is everywhere the customers are, how much are you differentiating the pricing strategy by channel? Or are you thinking about it, we have one approach up top, and then this is just a matter of executing that across all the various spots? So sorry that's an incredibly long question.
No, it's great.
One, who was there? What was the discussion like? And then two, how do you take into account omni-channel?
So who's there in pricing conversations? It's actually interesting because last Q3, Q4, shortly after I joined, we did a full, robust pricing analysis and competitive pricing project that included, finance had a seat at the table, our CEO had a seat at the table, our head of marketing had a seat at the table, as well as the heads of our sales channels had seats at the table. And there was a full analysis done of where our products fall versus our competitors. And we have different competitors in different segments of the market. We might have different competitors in Walmart versus on Amazon. And we really came together at that point and actually decided to lower our prices in Q3 and Q4 of last year, strategically across the brand, across the entire portfolio. And we do keep our pricing stable across all channels. And that was in an effort to really meet the consumer and really help alleviate some of this, inflationary pressure and other pressure that they're facing in their wallets these days, And we're happy that as we scale, we were able to get some economies of scale on the cost side. And we wanted to give that back to the consumer to really try to, be there for them in a way that they can repeatedly buy our product, and be fair with the margins we're taking on our products. So we had just gone through, probably a quarter-long process on this. And we had notified our retailers of our pricing reductions. You need to give retailers 60 to 90 days notice. So you can't just flip your pricing on retail at the flip of a switch. And those had just gone into place at the end of January of this year.
Yep.
So when all of the tariff noise came to be, my first thought was, can we stay true to this strategy? I didn't even want to go back to the table. I was like, can we hold this? We just did this full long-term strategic analysis.
Painful.
Like, you don't want to switch strategy because of short-term turbulence, if you can. I know a lot of companies were in a different position, but if you just got buy-in across the board, we had our board bought into this strategy, and there's some short-term turbulence that you can see through, ideally you want to stay the course. So truly, we did the modeling. I went back to that group of people and told them that we had the ability to hold if we were all together and aligned on that. And we had a plan to go, and we can talk about this later, but going to our manufacturers and just understanding their supply chain and understanding who was going to take which piece of the hit, because we felt like it was a strategy for everyone to ultimately succeed, and therefore everybody should contribute to some of the burden.
Yeah.
Allowed us to really just kind of stay the course with that strategic decision.
Yeah, I think it's super interesting. I mean, I have a couple of things I want to touch on. One that comes up is like, Drew, in D2C, especially in online, like I think most people's first instinct here was to raise prices, right? So just that notion overall of like, hey, there are viable strategies that don't necessarily involve raising prices where you can be profit accretive by not running price, even as COGS go up, right? So I'd be super interested, Drew, to hear from you about sort of like those non-obvious scenarios or tests that you guys can help enable around like, okay, keeping price flat or even reducing price as like keeping those things in the mix. And then I don't know that we need to go deep on it, but it's super interesting, Hayley, to like in retail, you kind of lose, in online, you have you can make your price and that is the end price, right?
Absolutely.
I could very much see a world today in which you make that commitment to lower your prices to retailers, and then you recommit in the face of all this to keep those prices where you said they were going to be. But the retailer says, well, screw you, I'm taking price increase because everything else is happening and you can't really go around that. Like, or how do you protect against that? Do you trust your partners? Do you just have to have full faith there? But because I could certainly see that happening.
If you think about who our retail partners are, Walmart's commitment to the consumer is everyday low price. So
Right.
I don't think that's as large of a risk there. Like,
Okay.
I think their fear was that all of their vendors were going to push, and a lot of them, I'm sure, push through price increases.
Right.
What's actually interesting is because of the 60, 90-day notice, the consumers haven't even seen. I'm sure a lot of those price increase notices were filed on April 7th that will come in the summer, and you can't just change that at retail. So I'm sure a lot of consumers have not even seen the full extent of the price increases that have been notified through retail.
Yeah. And there's some other retailers like Albertsons who is just like, nope, no, we're not taking any price increase. Like you can't,
the sentiment from the retailers is really, we don't want to raise price. We'll lose our sales. We'll lose our sell through. So I don't think that was really a large concern in our mind, to be honest.
Okay.
Yeah.
I appreciate you debunking my fear there. Yeah. Drew, tell us how to find more money without raising prices.
Well, one thing I was just going to say is no matter where you're watching, we can see questions that come through and want this to be interactive. So if you have things you want to share, story-wise, questions you have for Austin or Hayley or myself, please feel free to drop those in those comments and we can bring things up on stage. Yeah, I mean, we got a lot of calls in March and April. We've been talking about how to effectively change your prices in a data-driven way for like 5 years. And I think there was more interest in 1 week in analytical price changes than I had seen in like probably a year combined. And yeah, I mean, I think by and large, brands don't want to raise prices. Like I spoke to a couple journalists, and there were some questions like, do you think people are using this as an opportunity to, go take price where they don't need to? And I'm like, I don't think so. Like, I think their business is alive. They're pretty happy right now. But the impact of these tariffs, especially for people with more China exposure in their supply chains, was significant, with a wide range of uncertainties. So we've worked with a few hundred brands over the last month on, all right, what's your current situation? What is your range of potential new cost implications? Let's go understand. You need to take more margin because you're now underwater or not breaking, like barely breaking even. Where are the best ways to do that? And so we certainly went and tested higher prices in many cases. And there's a lot of nuance there beyond, our costs went up 15%. Let's raise prices 15% across the board. Most notably, you have to look at price changes at the portfolio level. Like, not all of your products are going to be able to sustain the same amount of price changes. Like Hayley spoke about, different competitors in different channels. There's also different competitors at different products. So one thing we try to do is help people analyze by collection, by product, where is there more room? And then also, where are, Austin, to your point, non-price levers? So a big one that we've seen people taking advantage of is shipping. And there's a few different levers there. I think very few people are running pure free shipping anymore, which has changed since 2020. I think before 2020, that was pretty much the blanket expectation. So we saw a lot of people raising the thresholds to achieve free shipping. And that does a couple things. It qualifies your baskets. Like, you're no longer subsidizing small orders that don't hit it. You're spending $10 to ship it on this $80 order. It encourages people to buy more at once. So often, if someone puts twice as much value in the box, it's not going to cost you twice as much to ship. So you can kind of amortize those shipping costs over a larger basket. And then after the threshold, also looking at the prices of the shipping rates that you charge. So if someone doesn't hit the threshold, okay, you charge 4, maybe that's still slight subsidization. Should you charge more? And we've also seen price changes from FedEx and UPS, and USPS just filed for a price increase. Don't quote me on this, but I think 7% for next year. So, okay, those costs are changing. Can we charge differently for products that are being shipped? And then the last big lever is discounting. And we've seen some very interesting data here around fewer discounts than this time last year. So we track, I wish I had some visuals. We track about 50,000 Shopify stores, all their products and price changes. And we've been tracking that for a couple of years. We monitor changes in those, and we were looking and asking, hey, are we seeing some big amount of inflation? And, we do see prices, I think maybe over the course of March, something like 12% of stores made some price increases. And that's a lot, but last year it was 8%. So it's a 50% bump, but we're still talking small amounts. What was really interesting was a number of stores making price decreases or price markdowns. We saw go from 10% to 4%. So there was actually, yes, we're seeing more people increase, but there was a larger effect of fewer people marking down prices. And so our hypothesis on that is that people are sitting on inventory, waiting out uncertainty, and not doing the typical markdowns that they would do, be it clearance, be it a sale period. We're very interested to see how Memorial Day goes. Because that doesn't, you can buy some margin by not marking down, but the bigger impact is you're extending your inventory runway and buying time until you have to bring more volume in. So that's another thing we've seen people testing with. And I'm with this latest news, we'll see, but we've been predicting a kind of slower Memorial Day in terms of sales than in prior years.
Got it. Oh, okay, here. Okay, so how are brands thinking about breaking out the impact of tariffs as a line item? Ethan, do you mean sort of like, I don't know if you can hear us or you can respond, but like, are you thinking about this basically as a line item in the financials or starting to think about it that way? I'll kind of assume that's what you mean.
Let's go with that. There's also, I could speak about kind of on-site
Oh, okay. Yeah, that
presentation
could be the
to the
other way.
customer here. But
Yeah, why
yeah,
don't you go there first? Because I think that's interesting too. That idea of people having it basically as a line alongside tax and shipping, basically in the got it on the cost of
Well,
customers.
there was a
Good.
rumor that Amazon was thinking about doing that. That got
But
shut down
yeah,
real fast.
they did it. So apparently it showed up on site, or they at least talked
Oh,
about it, and then
wow.
they rolled it back real fast. Yeah, the press secretary. I was happy to be on a flight when I was watching the Trump's morning press conference, and his secretary was basically like, "This is an act of," basically stopped just short of saying it was an act of terrorism, which I thought was
Wow.
I think the quote was, "This is a hostile and political act to break
correct.
out
Yeah,
tariffs." Yeah, we've gone through a couple chapters of our thinking here. I think when these first came out, our advice was, hey, break this out, show the cost to the customer, make it clear that like you don't want to, like, be transparent and try not to take responsibility for the price increase.
right.
And I think for some brands that very much makes sense. Like, depending on your audience, they may appreciate that, they may understand. And so, we've seen brands use the banner. Hey, you're not going to pay extra duties, especially people shipping from abroad.
Yep.
Once I get to checkout, no further duties due at receipt. Because now, like, if you get a DHL package in the US, they're like, hey, do you want to pay the $40 of extra duties on this? So transparency to the customer, I think, does work, especially if there's any doubt about there may be extra costs upon receipt. If you can dispel that, you will get people more likely to check out. I think what we don't recommend at the moment is adding extra things to the carts. So kind of like Amazon was doing, where it's another one of these line items when you get to checkout, like you're ordering DoorDash and you're like, what is this?
Yeah.
Fee? That we've seen some people test that, and there's just a huge amount of drop off at checkout. And like, it's a hidden fee effectively. And even if it's coming from the right place, like, consumers don't like it. I think the risk you run now is there's just so much uncertainty. If you say that the price is different because of tariffs,
right,
you're giving people a reason to wait to make the purchase. And so much of e-commerce is like, I am just convincing you, I'm selling you to take this risk. Give me your money, part with your hard-earned money to get something in 5 to 7 days from now. And like, I think it just gives you a little bit of a reason to wait. Like, if it's raining this morning in New York and I order an Uber and I'm like, surge prices up, I'm going to like wait 5 minutes, see if it changes. I think you may get higher bounce rates by talking about it too much. So that's some of our thinking on how we're looking at it right now.
Yeah, great question. Hayley, did you guys look at doing anything like that, or did it come up on the table, or like any other sort of like creative marketing ideas around?
We've definitely thought about advertising, no tariff pricing. Our pricing will stay stable. Honestly, it was a message we first shared with our retail partners and our supply chain partners very quickly. That was the most important conversation to have. From a consumer perspective, we just wanted to show stability. So for us, and again, we're fortunate. There are many companies who source finished goods from China who were in a completely different situation. But we felt it was a situation for us as a brand to take care of that shouldn't affect our customer.
I'm curious, maybe just like a sort of informal poll from the audience, and just drop it in the comments, but like, give us a rough, just so we know who's kind of listening, like, give us a rough indication of what you think your percentage hit is here, or is, how you're doing the math on your exposure. It looks like we got a question coming in from Alex too.
One question I had for you, Hayley, did you proactively communicate to your customers this plan that we are keeping prices the same? You mentioned you went to retail partners first. I'm sure they were very grateful for that, but did you guys communicate to customers directly?
And well, we had just communicated to our customers directly that we had brought prices down. So, I mean, I actually don't believe we've sent out a communication yet. It's definitely an opportunity for the team. I see this question from Alex. Can we divert?
Yeah. I would be in favor of telling customers.
100%.
What we see is anytime you're
100%. If I'm being completely honest, it's a matter of you're in the world of juggling. It's definitely something we should be taking advantage of. It's an easy win for us for sure.
For sure. We've seen a lot of customers also do hey, we are impacted. We are not going to make any decisions until May 20th, but we can't guarantee it thereafter. My wife and I just bought a stroller because of a message like that. And I don't know what'll happen, but they did.
One of the reasons that we were able to make that statement without concern for the near-term changes in tariff is because of our inventory position.
Yeah.
So we knew that even if there was impact, it wasn't going to hit our P&L until Q4 of this year.
Yeah. I think it's such an interesting time right now. Like there's so many between even now and last week, right? There's like there are a dozen of new strategies that have opened up, I think. One of which is certainly around the idea of like, Drew, what you just mentioned. Like, I think there actually is this very strategic way to be on the front foot. That as, I posted on LinkedIn of like, can you create a tariff, the idea of a tariff holiday, the same way we have tax holidays in a number of states now and other things where you can sort of pull forward those purchases and say like, hey, if you're planning on making a purchase for Q4, or you're planning on making a purchase for Mother's Day or something, like pull that forward, do it now so we can insulate you from any potential price changes or additional inflation or whatever other craziness might happen, because we kind of have this temporary pause, right? And so I think that's a super interesting way to think about it. But I think in general on the inventory side, now there's a whole other batch of strategies opening up, which is like, okay, do I try and front load everything now? I think the risk there is like, and I've seen some tweets, I saw somebody like, hey, book your 40K 20-foot container now, right? Because prices are only going to go up. We're definitely going to have, I feel like, some bullwhip in the supply chain where it gets harder and more expensive to get goods here, right? Or do you bank on the fact that, okay, this 90 days is just the first shoe to drop, and 90 days later we're gonna, the shipping capacity will be more open and you'll have even lower prices. So if you can hold out till then, right? It's so like a game of 4D chess right now. Yeah.
Because the 90-day holiday, if you think about it, I'd imagine the way that this universally is impacting businesses is for sure through packaging, because even if you source your packaging from a US packaging supplier, the resin and materials are coming from China.
Right.
So that is hitting pretty much every CPG company that there is. So let's say you're front loading and going to put in an order with your Chinese supplier. They probably have like a 6 to 8 week lead time for that order.
Right.
And the tariffs are determined the day it leaves the Chinese port, I'm pretty sure. So folks really have like 1 month to get those orders in while they don't have that risk of the tariff coming back before it leaves the port. Yeah. So this is going to be a really interesting window.
Yeah, and I was reading there's no precedent for retroactively lowering the duties. Like if the container is here,
we paid 145% on a shipment.
Yep. Like,
we definitely
and you're not going to be able to apply there's no
no, you're not getting that back.
The seller's guarantee.
Definitely not. Yeah.
I'm going to pull back up this question from Alex. So summing it up, you have co-manufacturers, be it packaging, be it on other things, who are going to be impacted by this. You're in the business of getting all the uncertainty into the model and getting ahead of it and understanding the range of uncertainty that you may face next year, the year after. Like, how do you approach those conversations with your suppliers so you're not surprised by COGS changes down the road?
Yeah. I would encourage everyone to be very interested in their COGS, and not just in the price that their co-manufacturer is charging them, but in the actual buildup of their cost of goods. So whether you have a transparent pricing arrangement with your co-manufacturer or not, there are definitely ways that you can understand, well, how much of that is tolling for their labor and overhead? How much of that is the raw material inputs that they're sourcing from elsewhere? How much of that is the packaging? and have transparent conversations with them with that knowledge. Like, as the brand, you need to have an understanding of those components of your cost of goods in order to inform these conversations. Because right off the bat, I know, I'm just going to throw out a range, but let's say 30% of what they charge us is actually the raws. Let's say 10% is the packaging. I have an idea of how much of the cost that they're charging me could be impacted and what could not. And I also think that brands really need to treat these co-manufacturers as partners in their business. Like, we are talking about increasing volume for all of us so that we all win. And, they understand what our margins are in market. They see our SRP and they know what we pay them. And, we also have a decent understanding of the margin that they're getting along this supply chain as well. So if you have that basis for a conversation and you're talking about strategically growing volume so that we all win, that's how you're able to have that productive conversation and really say, like, listen, like, we know you have this much room and we honestly have this much room. Your supplier also has room. You talk about one level up from them. How are we going to divvy this up in a way that's equitable and really helps us go to market and take advantage of this situation?
Yeah, I feel like it's awesome to have that conversation. I'm always curious, like, and it very much depends on the leverage in your supplier relationships. Like, is there a stick in that conversation for you, or is it pretty much just all carrot? Or is it to say, like, hey, if we're not able to get these, then we're going to have to reduce our volume commitment to you or parse it out over 3 or 4 different runs instead of you getting it now? Like,
yeah. I'm also a huge proponent in having dual sources for your products.
Yeah.
If you're a brand, and again, this comes with some scale, but I do encourage brands to think about this earlier than later. If you don't have a backup plan, you have nothing to come to the table in this conversation. You're at the complete liberty of your supplier. Whereas if you have other options and they know, you're not threatening, but you're just having an honest conversation of how to grow business for all of you.
Right. Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, it feels like partnership is a continued theme across your relationship downstream with your retailers and partners and then upstream. But
the theme is to really be someone that people want to work with. And that gets you a lot further than you'd think. So both from the supplier side and from our retail partner side.
Yeah. Have you guys, I am the other interpretation of line item on tariffs. And Austin, you've seen this, I'm sure, across a bunch. Hayley, you've made this decision. Like, how are people accounting for it?
Yeah. I mean, I'll tell you that from the Drivepoint perspective, and Hayley, I think we're probably pretty aligned on this, but like, so we've always broken out import taxes as a line item in the way that we structure a P&L on the Drivepoint side as sort of a component of your landed cost. So we have product and materials, freight, and then import taxes and duties have always been its own line item, because I think there are others, but those to me are the 3 most critical components of sort of your fully loaded landed COGS percentage, which is the way we cut a couple of different margins, but the first we cut gross margin, so people call it product margin at that level to say, like, okay, net revenue, less my fully loaded landed cost of goods, where does that land? And I think that's been awesome because we were able to, for a ton of our customers, like, really quickly sensitize that one input, right? It's in the Drivepoint standard model, it's a percentage of net revenue, basically, or percentage of COGS, that basically gets put in there. So very good, more lucky than good that we had that kind of built in, but it allowed us to really quickly run a bunch of scenarios. I think that, like, the interesting margin that I've been asking people to sort of look at or think about all in is, like, focus on that gross margin number, but think about you basically have 3 or 4 levers above that, right? So you have your top line pricing lever, you have the discounting lever, which we already mentioned. You also have the returns lever, which for brands, especially apparel brands right now, is a big lever and typically can be up to 20 or 25% on that of sort of those contra revenue accounts. And then you also have freight. And so freight is increasingly coming into the picture, I think, with these most recent changes, in thinking about the increases that we could see in container ship, thinking about the difference between freight and air, depending on the weight of your product and the loads that you need to have. And so there's all of those levers that go into to COGS, and to keep that gross margin stable. So I think there's really like 5 or 6 kind of margin points above where we stand. Tariffs are certainly a very important one, and one that we wholeheartedly recommend breaking out. But we've been sort of encouraging people to play with all the levers of the scenarios above that line, basically, and see which, if you can squeeze 1 or 2 points out of discounting, if you can squeeze 1 or 2 points out of returns by eliminating free returns, especially for, again, apparel and footwear are the sort of classic offenders here, where that could be 25 to 30% of net revenue. If you can charge a little bit more for shipping, to your point, right, and add 1 or 2 points between gross and net up there, if you can reduce your freight costs in one way or another, these are all things that suddenly get pretty meaningful to look at in terms of reducing that overall tariff burden.
Yeah.
No, absolutely.
One of the other things that we've been coaching people on is, if you are predominantly e-commerce and don't have retail partners who are in minimum advertised price agreements, like discount and pricing and returns are all highly reversible levers. So they are,
correct.
You should absolutely go build resilience in your supply chain and like get multiple suppliers for things. That will take time and focus and energy and money. You can try changing that return policy today. You
Right.
could go A/B test different prices today. And great, your right answer may be a higher price last week. And then Monday, we have this new announcement. Now you can use that same data and be like, okay, I have a different optimal price point. And there's lots of brand considerations to take into account here. But it's like, that is something you can, depending on your business, go in and change a button, launch a test, change some copy on the site, and immediately fix that lever, versus things like,
I think the concern with that, I think that's a great lever for one-time purchases. The concern if you have a recurring purchase item is your consumers are going to notice. And I'll go back to that stability piece. So I definitely envy online-only brands and the additional flexibility they're able to have right now. But that's not to say we still have the discount lever, we still have the return policy and shipping policy levers as well. But ultimately, do you want to be, your consumers are going to notice, and then they're going to be trained eventually to either stock up when it goes down, or you'll see your sales volume drop off. So, the pricing always comes with the volume lever that you need to be a little bit careful with.
Yep. Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm curious if anyone has any other questions or comments, please drop them in the chat. I know there's plenty of you guys here. I would love to hear any sort of core strategies, especially on the marketing side, that people are using or sort of thinking about leaning into this. I've seen a customer, a brand that we're talking to, sort of like put up a giant splash page on the homepage yesterday that said tariff-proof products, basically, and sort of did a lot of that. I've seen other people starting to lean in terms of just the components of the product or the pieces of the business that are based in the USA, sort of like just trending off of the more, the sort of homegrown sentiment that seems to be popular. Like that, there's a whole vein of opportunities that seem to be opening up there. I don't know, Drew or Hayley, if you've seen, just as a consumer, or even like anything that is getting your attention in terms of what people are doing to leverage it as a window of opportunity here.
I mean, definitely with email as a lever, just as a consumer, I've been seeing a lot of tariff-free pricing. As you mentioned earlier, no additional duties on delivery is a very common one I'm seeing now. Just a lot of really focusing on communication with the consumer and limiting the volatility from their perspective.
Yeah, Drew, anything that you've seen?
Yeah, same. I mean, as a consumer, hey, we're keeping our prices flat, come to us now, or things could change after this date, or a marketing campaign of, hey, come support us, we're doing things the right way. There's a more political angle to take depending on your audience too, of, hey, come support us, we're a brand, doing right. I think having a founder voice out there is something I've seen a lot of, like, we are running a business and this is challenging. But yeah, one thing we've been asking ourselves is like, who's the winner here, if anyone? And I think people with a lot of inventory have far more strategic options available. People with supply chains predominantly in the US, also have a lot of strategic options available. But yeah, I'm curious if you guys have thoughts on like who wins. Let's say this 90-day pause comes, we kind of reach a steady state, maybe a little bit lower than where we are now. Yeah. How do things look different 6 months ago? Like who's gained share? Who's doing better?
I honestly think the name
of
of the game since COVID is cash. Who wins are the companies that aren't going through their cash and running on a zero tank, and have just nothing to manage through this type of turbulence. So I think the companies that are winning have a strong cash position and have been managing the business to maximize EBITDA. Austin, Drivepoint's helped us expand our EBITDA margins in the last year. I'll give you an honest plug. But I think the days of running the business until your bank account's at $25,000 before your next raise is just heavily ill-advised, given what's been going on the last 5-6 years.
Yeah. My sense is like there's sort of going to be a couple of categories of clear losers. I think it's hard to name the winners. Like there are definitely some brands that I think have just straight up, been on the arbitrage game of very cheap products and have made their business and have built marketing machines, largely direct to consumer marketing machines on the back of very, very strong gross product margins because of products sourced in certain parts of the world. Right. And so I do think that there is going to be a little bit of carnage in that space. The way to survive there, I think, is you have to very quickly move to new marketing channels or very quickly switch your distribution. We have a couple of customers who have incredibly successful marketing machines, and a couple of them were incredibly prescient last year and earlier about relocating core supply chain stuff to the US. So that's been actually fascinating to watch that play out of people who, frankly, like when we were looking at scenarios and things with them, or I would, catch wind of what they were doing, I was like, that's a very opinionated bet. We'll put it that way, to use that much of your cash to onshore manufacturing. And for some of them, it's going to save the business. Like it's fully going to save the business. So I think those are the losers. I think some of the winners will be the folks who had durable supply chains. Obviously, that makes complete sense. That seems very obvious. But I think, interestingly, it'll be some of the folks who have had a smaller number of SKUs, so smaller SKU count, where you have a little bit less fad risk or sort of supply risk. Just you don't need to carry as much inventory to sell the same thing. The best example of this that I love and I'll use over and over again is like Lululemon at the very high end, right? Like Lulu has this incredible insulation to these things. One, because they have a powerful brand, but two, because so much of their sales volume comes in a core set of SKUs that really are not going out of style, right? Their core leggings account for a huge portion of their base. And so they can afford to hold large inventory balances because they know that there's no obsolescence risk. And so they're typically sitting on a bigger inventory balance, and they can draw down against that as they need to insulate themselves and sort of manage their cash flow. The other batch of brands that I think will be winners are the folks who are really good at dynamic pricing and dynamic marketing. So I just am increasingly, there's so much change here and so much volatility that the folks who can lean into that and can be really responsive to the changes in what's going on and use every one of these opportunities to play that out, I think are going to be strong winners. Certainly, I think being better capitalized and planning for cash is a big one, right? I think more important than ever, and I'm certainly talking my own book, but like scenario planning with cash as your key metric, like end of year cash right now, I think is a really critical thing to be doing in terms of like, okay, what happens? Because there's certainly opportunity. What happens if I make that inventory purchase? It's like, okay, well, what happens if you make that inventory purchase and consumer prices still haven't popped in and we see inflation and unemployment and we get a weak or a soft Q4 and the capital markets tighten and rates don't come? Like there's all kinds of like sort of second order effects that could happen. So I think that's probably the biggest one. In general, I think consumer staples and repeatable purchase products are in a better position than consumer discretionary, just because of the risk around consumer wallets between now and the end of Q4 and sort of any sort of uncertainty or disruption there. But I will say that like I'm much more bullish on the US consumer than I've sort of maintained a steady bull rating for the last 2 years. I just haven't seen. There's been a lot of talk about the U.S. consumer demise, and frankly, I just don't see it. The primary reason for that to me is so many people are still sitting on 30-year mortgages at 2% or in that neighborhood. And so the raw cost of housing for most Americans hasn't gone up.
Right.
But yeah, that's kind of a rambling answer, and we're starting to get into my macro takes, which nobody wants to hear. But I think that's I think that there's some clear losers. I think it's harder to figure out who the winners will be. Yeah.
I wish I had one of those mortgages.
Yeah,
that sounds great. Yeah, I mean, one thing I'm curious about, I think I've seen more speculation versus any data on this, but industries like wellness, certainly food and bev, I think correlates with consumables, but those are industries that are much more likely to have a big part of the supply chain in the US already, just because of ingredient control and quality control. Yep. So you guys are already, that industry is priced in for the naturally higher cost of doing business. Yeah. And your business is built to acquire customers profitably at that elevated price point. Consumers are used to it. Versus, the apparel or footwear, other discretionary things that tend to be further ashore and are now going to be much more exposed to cost increases. There's an argument, if you think about Meta, Google, digital marketing is a big supply demand marketplace, that like wellness, beauty, food and bev should now have a competitive edge in bidding for customers and see lower cost of acquisition, or since that's never really a thing, maybe fewer increases in cost of acquisition or more steady. So that's a theory.
Yep.
Have you guys seen any indication of that? Like on the digital marketing side, is that something that you guys have been talking about internally, or Austin, you've heard other brands talk about? That's one I've yet to see any data on.
I haven't seen any data on it either. And also to answer Alex's question that's in the chat of where this becomes a tailwind, on Liberation Day on April 7th or 8th or whatever that was, when there was a lot of turmoil and uneasiness, my first thought and kind of my biggest takeaway for whomever's listening to this is anytime you have a situation where every single company is impacted by a singular disturbance, that's an opportunity for a competitive advantage, because you've just been leveled out to other brands or competitors who may have far more resources than you. They may have a different marketing engine than you. When this type of disturbance comes into play, this is now an opportunity. Everyone's kind of been leveled out and kicked back together. And your ability to act quickly and take advantage of potential upsides here can really materially impact your ability to gain market share. And the first thing we talked about was how much cash everyone's going to have to spend at Meta and Google during this crisis. And again, it's just a theory. I haven't seen the data either. But we've been watching very closely for opportunities to really take advantage of this situation and deploy more dollars to acquire customers, as less fortunate brands are going to have to pull back.
Yeah, I think there's definitely been some sections of the market, particularly in lower cost one-time purchase stuff, where I think we've seen and heard a little bit of a tailwind, like literally just the quick arb of Temu and some of these other players reducing marketing spend, right? So I think there's always short-term arbs on that stuff. My gut is like Meta stock is too valuable for the auction to get more efficient, really. But I think there's actually a lot of scenarios in which this becomes a tailwind, right? I think look, overall, like I don't think that the current administration or anyone actually wants to see the American economy go into recession or the American consumer to really take a hit, right? Like forest for the trees. I think this is largely a negotiating tactic to reset the balance of some of these things and on other non-trade matters as well. And I think that my gut says that President Trump would love nothing more than to have a raucous, rip-roaring Q4 American consumer, where some of that money either comes back to consumers in some form of a stimulus check, or all of the tariffs sort of get wiped away just before just in time for the holiday season sort of thing. And we have an absolute ripper into the end of the year on the stock market ahead of the midterms, right? So like that to me is painting the picture of what I think could be the massive tailwind case. And you've had consumers maybe who have pulled back and a little bit more cautious, and now you are feeling flush as we head into Q4. So there's still enough time for a candy cane scenario like that, I think, to materialize where it does become positive. Now I certainly wouldn't be betting the farm on that, but I think there's a lot of reasons for that to happen on the macro side. And then on the micro side, yeah, I think as Hayley mentioned, there's all the brands who can adapt and lean into it from rethinking strategy or reforging, being nimble with marketing, or thinking about different bundling strategies or different product strategies, I think can certainly have some tailwinds behind them.
Yeah, that it'll be interesting. I mean, it's been, the consumer has been resilient. So I think it's just, or Taylor, go ahead.
No, I'm just agreeing with you.
Yeah,
they've been through a lot the last few years, that's for sure. Never mind just the recent quarter.
We started doing this in 2020, right before COVID. And back then when I would ask people about how they picked their prices or how they chose which discounts to give or why they were offering free shipping to everyone, it was like, well, it works. Yeah. We haven't needed to change it in 6 years. We put money in the Facebook machine and customers come out. And it's so interesting to see when I talk to customers now or brands, Hayley, even as you mapped it, I have a massive amount of uncertainty around me, and I need to go map out all of these scenarios so that I am prepared and like able to respond to the volatility. Be that way higher freight back in 2022, be that tariffs today, be that inflation over the last couple of years, be that, I don't know, like changes to how tracking works and my CAC. And so, I think the tailwind is just continues to be for operators who do want to get their hands dirty, build a data set and an understanding that like helps you plan through different scenarios and react to what is now becoming the increasingly inevitable volatility. And like, I mean, we've had a lot of brands that have worked with us go out of business over the last 2 years. And like the ones who are winning are the ones who are analytical and like don't ignore the model and the scenario and the testing data because they're scared of it, but they actually lean into it and then go use that as an advantage. Cause like you could go react, Hayley, and tell your partners, I'm going to be the best partner to you because in one day you understood exactly how this was going to impact you and what you were able to do.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think Hayley, you said it, and maybe that's a good point to end on here, but like you said it, I think a really interesting thing, which is the emotional output of that to some degree, or for the business, is to say like, okay, running all these scenarios, evaluating tests on pricing, doing all these things and having some data next to those things allows us to make those decisions calmly and confidently, right? And to act swiftly and decisively. And I think the delta between action and inaction in terms of weeks or days or months is really where the margin is made, and those winners and losers will get determined. So
I wholeheartedly believe that.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I know we're at the top of the hour. Thank you to all the folks who tuned in as well. And thank you, Drew, for hosting. And this has been amazing. And look forward to doing it soon. Yeah. We will get
Hayley, thank you for joining.
Hayley, that was awesome. You're a true savant on all this stuff. We'll get the recording up. We'll have some clips out on social, and we'll make sure that everyone gets a chance to watch, even if they weren't able to tune in. So thank you guys all for coming, and we'll see you again soon.
Nice chatting.